Chapter 1, A Kiss from a Game. Manhattan, New York shimmered under 1,000 lights. A towering glass building in Midtown had been transformed into a stage for tonight's charity gala, where the elite gathered to showcase their generosity, or at least pretend to. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected off marble floors, the clink of wine glasses mingling with polite laughter. Cassie Monroe, 28, stood behind the temporary bar, hands swiftly mixing a martini. Her tight black uniform made her look sharp, but the tiny silver guitar pendant peeking from beneath her collar hinted at her true self. Cassie didn't belong here. She was a self-taught musician, scraping by on-side gigs to afford recording equipment. By day, she played acoustic guitar in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, writing rustic folk songs and uploading videos to YouTube. A few thousand followers tuned in, but the dream of performing on a big stage still felt far away. Tonight, all she wanted was to finish her shift, collect her tips, and go home to her guitar. "Cassie, hurry up! That real estate mogul's waiting for his third drink," whispered Lena, a fellow bartender, nodding toward an impatient middle-aged man. Cassie smiled and slid the martini across the counter. She was used to the fast pace of events like this, polite smiles avoiding the curious gazes of the guests. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the sip of wine she'd had during break, or maybe it was the glint in Lena's eyes, like she was about to stir up trouble. As the crowd thinned, Lena pulled Cassie and two other co-workers, Miguel and Tara, into a shadowed corner behind the bar. "We need a little fun," Lena declared, raising a bottle of Prosecco she'd borrowed from storage. "Let's play Truth or Dare. Whoever refuses drinks the whole glass." Cassie rolled her eyes but couldn't resist Lena's mischievous grin. She took another sip of Prosecco, warmth spreading through her. "All right, but keep it tame," she said. The first round flew by. Miguel picked Truth and admitted to faking sick to skip work. Tara picked Dare and danced a ridiculous jig on the floor. When it was Cassie's turn, Lena arched an eyebrow. "Truth or Dare, girl?" Cassie hesitated. She didn't like talking about herself. The past, the unfinished songs, or the dreams she kept buried. "Dare," she said, voice trembling slightly from the alcohol. Lena grinned wickedly. "Kiss a stranger in the room. Anyone you want, but it has to be the most unapproachable one." Miguel whistled. Tara covered her mouth, giggling. Cassie blushed, her heart thudding. "You guys are insane," she muttered, but Lena's stare told her there was no backing out. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and scanned the room. Tuxedos and ball gowns floated past, but one figure drew her attention. He stood alone near the window, back straight, eyes distant, dark brown hair, a perfectly tailored black suit, and a face so cold it seemed nothing in this world could touch him. "Him," Cassie whispered, pointing. Lena squinted. "Oh, Cassie, that's Julian Hayes, tech CEO, ultra rich, ultra private. Kiss him? Good luck." Cassie swallowed hard, but the Prosecco and peer pressure pushed her forward. The crowd blurred, her heartbeat roared in her ears. Julian Hayes stood silently, holding a glass of whiskey, eyes fixed on the city beyond. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered, but there was something lonely in the way he stood. Cassie stopped a step away. "Excuse me," she said, voice shaky. Julian turned. His deep blue eyes met hers, unreadable. She didn't think, she just moved. Rising on her toes, she placed a hand on his shoulder and kissed him. His lips were cool, laced with whiskey, yet unexpectedly soft. The kiss lasted only 3 seconds, but it scrambled her breath. She pulled away, face flushed, her shirt shifted just enough for the guitar pendant to show. Julian looked stunned, his gaze flickering as though he'd just been pulled from a dream. "What just happened?" he asked, voice low and calm, but his eyes locked on her. Cassie mumbled, "Just a game. I'm sorry." She turned before he could say anything else and bolted back to the bar, her heart ready to explode. Lena and the others clapped and snickered, but Cassie wished she could vanish. "You're insane, Cassie," Miguel laughed. She shook her head, trying to focus on wiping glasses, but the feel of his lips still haunted her. In the corner of the room, Julian still stood, his finger lightly touching his mouth. He wasn't used to being surprised. As the CEO of Hayes Innovations, he'd built walls around himself long ago, after his fiancée's betrayal. But that girl, with the guitar necklace and nervous eyes, had shaken something loose. He watched her through the crowd, saw her quietly mixing drinks, softly humming a tune. That melody, raw and honest, threaded its way into his mind. Cassie's shift ended at midnight. She pocketed her tips, just enough to buy a new set of guitar strings, and stepped into the cold street. New York air turned her breath into pale mist. Pulling her coat tighter, she thought about the kiss. Idiot, she scolded herself. Julian Hayes was someone she'd never see again. He belonged to a world of chandeliers and tuxedos. She had her guitar, and dreams still out of reach. She took the subway back to Brooklyn. Her tiny apartment greeted her with the smell of old wood and warm yellow lights. Her acoustic guitar lay on the bed, the only friend who truly understood her. Cassie sat down, strummed a few chords, and softly sang a line from a song she was writing. Lost in the city, chasing a spark. The melody rose, soothing her heart. She didn't know that, in a high-rise penthouse across the city, Julian Hayes was searching for a name on YouTube, Cassie Monroe. A video appeared, her singing in a cafe, voice clear, eyes burning with passion. He clicked play, and for the first time in years felt his heart stir. You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Chapter 2. A Chance Encounter. Julian Hayes wasn't used to being haunted. As the CEO of Hayes Innovations, he ran his life the way he ran his company. Everything planned, no room for surprises. But since that night at the charity gala, the image of the girl with the guitar necklace and that unexpected kiss lingered in his mind. Cassie Monroe. He'd found her on YouTube with just a few clicks. Her channel had thousands of followers, enough for a presence but not fame. Her videos, singing in coffee shops, strumming an acoustic guitar in a tiny apartment, carried a raw honesty he couldn't look away from. Her voice, warm and unpolished, pulled him out of the cold, controlled days he was used to. Today, Julian sat in his office on the 50th floor, gazing out over Manhattan. On his computer screen was one of Cassie's videos, a song called City Sparks. The lyrics were simple but hit him deep. Chasing lights but losing heart. He turned off the video, telling himself he didn't have time for such nonsense. But her lips, the look in her eyes as she walked away, kept flashing back. He had to see her again. Not to pursue her. Julian didn't believe in love anymore after his fiancé's betrayal, but to understand why she had shaken him so deeply. The Rusty Anchor, a bar in the Lower East Side, buzzed on Friday night. Cassie stood behind the bar mixing a mojito, neon lights casting a glow on her high-tied brown hair. She wore a black t-shirt, her silver guitar pendant peeking out at the collar. The shift was busy, but she liked the rhythm. It helped her forget the stupid kiss from last week. Julian Hayes. She still blushed thinking about it, wondering what had possessed her. Thankfully, he belonged to a completely different world, and she would never see him again. On her break, Cassie sat in a corner of the bar with the small guitar she always brought along. She liked to sing a song to relax, and tonight she picked one of her own, Under the Noise. Her voice rose, gentle yet full of emotion, telling a story of dreams buried beneath the hum of city life. The crowd gradually quieted. A few turned to listen. Cassie didn't notice. She was singing for herself as always. Julian walked in at that very moment. He wore a navy shirt, no suit, trying to blend into the casual atmosphere of the Rusty Anchor. But his sharp eyes drew a few curious looks. He took a seat in a shadowed corner, ordered a whiskey, and listened. Cassie's voice drifted through the noise, touching him like a breeze. As she sang the final line, "Find me where the silence grows," his heart stirred with a feeling he hadn't known in years. When she finished, a few guests clapped. She smiled, tucked her guitar away, and returned to the bar. Then she saw him. Julian Hayes sitting there, his eyes locked on her. Her heart slammed. What is he doing here, she wondered, forcing herself to stay calm. Another whiskey, she asked, her tone a bit sharp. Julian gave a faint smile, the corner of his mouth lifting. No, thank you. That was a beautiful song. Did you write it yourself? Cassie froze. She hadn't expected him to notice, let alone recognize her. "Yeah, just messing around," she said, wiping the counter to hide her nerves. Julian tilted his head. "Didn't sound like messing around. That melody, it made me forget everything for a moment." His words were sincere, but Cassie was wary. Rich men often spoke sweetly. She knew better. "Thanks," she said curtly, turning away to serve another guest. A few days later, Cassie sat in her favorite coffee shop in Williamsburg, a notebook open in front of her. She was jotting down lyrics, caught in a moment, scared to stay. She didn't know who the song was about, but Julian's image kept flickering in her thoughts. She shook her head, telling herself it was just leftover noise from that silly kiss. Julian appeared, as if summoned from her mind. He wore a knit coat, looking more approachable than last time, but still unmistakably him. "Another coincidence," he said, sliding into the seat across from her with a polite nod. Cassie raised an eyebrow. "Is it really?" Julian smiled, not denying it. "I saw you writing something." "Lyrics?" he asked, nodding toward the notebook, curiosity in his eyes. Cassie snapped the notebook shut, slightly annoyed. "Are you following me, Mr. CEO?" Julian raised his hands in mock surrender. "Not following. I just like your music. It's real." Cassie studied him, searching for the usual fake charm, but saw only rare sincerity. They started talking, awkwardly at first, then more naturally. Julian told her he used to play piano in college, but gave it up for work. Cassie admitted she wrote songs to forget bad days. "Music's like a friend that never leaves," she said, and immediately blushed, realizing how vulnerable that sounded. The next day, a package arrived at the Rusty Anchor, addressed to Cassie. Inside was a high-quality condenser microphone, the kind she could only dream of affording. No name, just a note. "For your voice to shine." Cassie frowned, instantly suspecting Julian. Did he think she needed charity? But she couldn't deny it. The mic would seriously improve her recording quality. That night, Julian showed up at the bar, almost like he knew she'd confront him. "You sent the mic, didn't you?" Cassie said, voice a mix of gratitude and challenge. Julian nodded. "I didn't mean to offend. I just think you deserve the best." Cassie sighed, but something in his eyes, gentle, almost lonely, softened her. "Thank you," she said, "but don't think I owe you anything." They talked longer, about music, New York, small things. Cassie realized Julian wasn't like the wealthy men she'd met before. He didn't boast, he didn't control. He listened, really listened, as if her voice was the only thing that mattered. As the bar neared closing, Julian set down his glass. "I'm starting a scholarship fund for underprivileged students," he said. "I want you to be an advisor, to help design the program, and maybe teach music to the kids." Cassie blinked, surprised. "Why me?" Julian looked straight at her. "Because you know how to inspire. I see that in your music." Cassie didn't answer right away. She needed time. Julian stood, leaving behind a business card. "Think about it, Cassie." He walked away, but his gaze lingered, like a melody she couldn't forget. She held the card, her fingers brushing the guitar pendant. For the first time, she wondered if fate was daring her to play a new game. Manhattan in the afternoon buzzed like a never-ending symphony. Car horns, footsteps, and voices all blending on the streets below. Inside the sleek offices of Hayes Innovations, Cassie Monroe sat at a conference table, a stack of documents about the scholarship fund in front of her. She still wasn't used to this world, the glass walls, oversized screens, and the professional chill that hung in the air. But this part-time advisory job was an opportunity to stabilize her finances, and more importantly, to teach music to underprivileged students. Cassie, 28, her signature silver guitar pendant peeking from under her blouse, felt like she had stepped into a world that didn't quite belong to her. And the one who had brought her into it, Julian Hayes, was sitting across from her, those deep blue eyes more intense than she would have liked. Julian, 34, was no longer the cold CEO she'd kissed at the charity gala. He was still polished in a gray shirt, but something gentler surfaced when he spoke about the scholarship fund. "We need a music program that actually inspires," he said, sliding a document across the table. What do you think about teaching guitar and songwriting to the kids? Cassie nodded, flipping through the papers, though her mind wandered. She still didn't understand why Julian had chosen her, a bartender, an unknown musician on YouTube. For this, the meeting ended, but Julian asked her to stay a little longer to discuss further. The office slowly emptied, golden light from the sunset spilling through the windows. Cassie placed the small guitar she always carried onto the table, like a silent shield. "I've reviewed the plan," she said in a steady tone. "The kids need something practical, like learning how to turn their feelings into lyrics." Julian smiled slightly. "Like you do?" Cassie blushed. She hadn't expected him to be so familiar with her music. "I just write so I don't go crazy in this city," she said, half joking. Julian stood and walked to the window, gazing down at the streets. "You know, I used to play piano," he said, his voice low. "But I gave it up. Life didn't leave room for it." Cassie tilted her head, curious. "So why do you care about music now?" Julian turned back to her, a shadow in his eyes. "Because it reminds me that I used to feel things." The mood shifted, more intimate. Cassie began strumming a few chords on her guitar, a nervous habit. Julian sat down closer to her, not too close, but near enough for her to feel his presence. "How did you write your first song?" he asked. Cassie paused, her fingers brushing the guitar pendant. She wasn't used to opening up, but his eyes, sincere and non-judgmental, made it easier. "I was 20, she began quietly. "I dated this guy. Thought it was love. He said he'd help me record professionally, but he just wanted money. Took everything I saved for equipment, then left." She gave a bitter laugh. "I wrote my first song the night he disappeared. It was awful, but it kept me from falling apart." Julian listened without interrupting. He saw himself in her story. Betrayals, scars no one else could see. "And you?" Cassie asked, genuinely curious. "A guy like you probably has people around all the time. Why are you alone?" Julian looked at her, surprised by the bluntness. He sighed, and for the first time his mask slipped. 5 years ago, I was engaged. Her name was Elise. I thought she loved me, but she only wanted a tech project I was building. She sold it to my competitor and walked away. It was worth millions, but losing it didn't hurt as much as losing trust. Cassie was silent, hearing the pain in his voice. She strummed a gentle chord, trying to soften the air between them. "I don't really know what to say," she admitted, "but I think you deserve better." Julian smiled, his first real smile. "So do you, Cassie." They kept talking about the streets of New York, how Cassie found melodies in car horns and falling rain. Julian shared how he used to love jazz, but now only listened to music to escape pressure. Cassie teased, "Jazz? I thought you were more of a dry symphony kind of guy." Julian laughed, his eyes sparkling. "You make me want to listen to your music more." To break the tension, Cassie picked up her guitar. "Okay, but don't laugh," she warned, then strummed a slow melody. She sang Streetlight Lullaby, a song she'd written about wandering Brooklyn at night, searching for light in the dark. Her voice was clear and honest, the lyrics telling their own story. Under streetlights were just strangers, holding secrets, chasing dangers. Julian sat motionless, feeling something inside him stir with every note. By the time she sang the final line, he felt a part of himself fill that had long been empty. Cassie stopped, cheeks flushed. "It's not finished," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. Julian looked at her, his voice husky. "It's perfect." He pulled out his phone, opened a recording app. "Sing it again. I want to keep it." Cassie laughed, shaking her head. "Are you nuts? I don't sing on command." But she still played a few chords again, letting him record a short clip. The sound of her guitar filled the office, like a secret only the two of them shared. As the sun finally set, Cassie packed up. Julian walked her to the elevator, the air between them lighter than ever. "Do you think music can heal?" he asked suddenly. Cassie looked at him, her eyes soft. "It saved me. Maybe it can save you too." Julian nodded, saying nothing more, but his eyes said everything. Cassie stepped outside, New York's night air wrapping around her. She thought about Julian, not the wealthy CEO, but the man with scars like hers. Back in his office, Julian replayed the recording. Cassie's voice rang out, raw and real. Under streetlights, we're just strangers. He saved the file to his phone, a rare smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt like he could trust someone. And her voice, he knew he wanted to hear it forever. Chapter 3. A misunderstanding that shattered trust. The Plaza Hotel glittered like a palace, crystal chandeliers casting light over ball gowns and tuxedos at tonight's charity gala. Cassie Monroe stood near the bar, wearing a borrowed black dress from Lena, feeling like a stray note in a symphony of luxury. Julian Hayes had invited her as a consultant for the scholarship fund, but the way he'd looked at her over the past few weeks, gentle, attentive, told a deeper story. She had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, he saw her as more than an unknown musician. But tonight her heart was uneasy, like she sensed a storm was coming. Julian's scholarship fund was the centerpiece of the event. On the giant screen, a video played showcasing the students the fund had helped, backed by Streetlight Lullaby, the song Cassie had written. Her voice echoed through the ballroom, raw and emotional, silencing the crowd. Julian stood on stage speaking about the fund's mission, but his eyes scanned the audience for her. Cassie smiled, fingers clutching the strap of her bag where her lyric notebook rested. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but for Julian, she had said yes. After his speech, Cassie was invited on stage to answer questions about the music program. She stepped into the bright lights, heart pounding. A reporter with a sharp smile raised her mic. "Ms. Monroe, your song in the video is deeply moving, but I've heard it bears a strong resemblance to a track by Lila Gray. Did you borrow inspiration from her?" Cassie froze as if punched in the gut. Streetlight Lullaby was her soul, born from nights wandering Brooklyn. "No," she answered, voice trembling. "I wrote that song myself. I don't know Layla Gray." The crowd murmured. The reporter pressed on, sweet voice laced with venom. "Really? Then what about the rumor that you once dated Martin Kessler, Mr. Hayes' biggest competitor? Did he get you this opportunity?" The room went still. Cassie felt the blood drain from her face. Martin Kessler. 4 years ago, when she was just a 24-year-old hopeful musician, Martin had approached her, claiming to be a music producer. He promised to get her into a studio, but only used her to network with artists and sponsors, then disappeared once she was no longer useful. She hadn't known he was a tech businessman or that he had any connection to Julian. She looked at Julian, standing near the stage. His face had darkened. The old pain, Elise's betrayal, selling his $1 million project to Kessler, clearly written in his expression. "I didn't know who Martin was back then," Cassie said, her voice cracking. "He was just some guy in the music scene. I have no ties to him." But her words were fragile, drowning beneath the crowd's skeptical whispers. The reporter smiled, moving on to another question, leaving Cassie shattered on stage. She stepped down, legs shaky, and found Julian in a corner of the ballroom. He stood alone, fingers clenched around a whiskey glass. "Julian," she said, pleading, "I didn't know Martin was your rival. He lied to me, used me. And the song, it's mine." Julian looked at her, his eyes colder than she had ever seen. "You were his," he said, voice low. "And now you're here, in my project. And I'm supposed to believe that's coincidence?" Cassie blinked, tears spilling. "You think I'm like him? After everything I've shared with you?" Julian stepped back, his expression caught between pain and doubt. "Elise said she was innocent too," he muttered. "She took everything I built and gave it to Kessler. I don't know who to trust anymore, Cassie." His words cut like blades. Cassie backed away, her voice breaking. "If you want someone without a past, without mistakes, then I'm not her." She turned and ran, fleeing the ballroom, leaving behind the lights and laughter. Outside the plaza, the New York night was bitterly cold. Cassie hugged herself, trying to hold back the sobs. She had opened her heart to Julian, sung for him, and he met her with suspicion. Her song, the thing she cherished most, was now being called a stolen work. She called a cab and returned to her small apartment in Brooklyn. In the dark, she sat by the window, watching the city lights. But she didn't touch her guitar. Tonight, music couldn't soothe her. Back inside the ballroom, Julian stood alone, whiskey glass empty. Cassie's voice still played on the screen. Under streetlights, we're just strangers. He remembered her singing that in his office, how sincere her eyes had been. But Martin Kessler's name loomed like a ghost, dragging the pain of Elise back to life. He wanted to believe Cassie, but the fear of betrayal was louder. He pulled out his phone and replayed Streetlight Lullaby. Her voice made his heart ache. He had been wrong to say what he did, but he didn't know how to fix it. Julian left the gala without a word. In the back of his car, he listened to her song, Eyes Distant. He wanted to find her, to apologize, but fear held him back. In Brooklyn, Cassie held her notebook and wrote one line. Trust is a song I forgot how to sing. Tears fell as she closed it. Two hearts in the same city, now separated by a melody no one was singing. Early autumn in Pennsylvania was gentler than New York. Tree-lined roads blanketed with golden leaves and the air crisp and clean. Cassie Monroe stood before a small classroom in a community center in a struggling town, her acoustic guitar in hand, guiding a group of kids through basic chords. She had left New York 3 weeks ago, taking a volunteer teaching position through a nonprofit she had contacted long ago. She needed space, not just from the city, but from Julian Hayes and the crushing doubts he had voiced at the charity gala. But even here, among children's laughter, her heart remained heavy, like a song still missing its chorus. Cassie rented a small room in a local boarding house, just big enough for her guitar and lyric notebook. She tried to find her spark again, but every chord reminded her of Julian's eyes, tender in the office, cold at the gala. He'd called her a user, questioned even Streetlight Lullaby, a song born from her own broken pieces. She told herself she was strong, but the pain crept in like autumn wind through old windows. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Julian threw himself into work like a machine. Meetings, contracts, strategies for Hayes Innovations filled his days. But at night, he couldn't escape Cassie. He'd rewatch her cafe performance on YouTube, her voice whispering, "Under streetlights, we're just strangers." Each note felt like a quiet accusation. He had let fear cloud his trust. Martin Kessler, who'd once manipulated both Elise and Cassie, wasn't worth losing her. Julian opened his laptop and typed an email. Cassie, I'm sorry. I never should have doubted you. Your song, your voice, they're real. I want to make things right. He typed, deleted, typed again, but he didn't send it. Pride and fear of rejection held him back. Instead, he watched a new video Cassie had uploaded days ago, a song called Broken Chords. Its lyrics dripped with pain. You took my song, left me in silence. Trust was a note I couldn't find. Julian listened, heart clenched. She had written it because of him, because of what he said. He closed the laptop, knowing he had to do something, but he didn't know where to start. In Pennsylvania, Cassie was teaching the kids how to write lyrics, encouraging them to tell their own stories through music. She smiled as one shy boy strummed his first chord, but her eyes drifted. She carried her guitar through town, playing in the park, at small cafes, trying to find herself again. One night she sat by the Susquehanna River, writing broken chords in her notebook. The lyrics poured out like tears. I sang for you, but you didn't hear. She uploaded the video, not expecting anyone to watch, only needing release. The next day, an email arrived from Julian's Scholarship Foundation. Subject, Invitation to the Tech and Arts Conference. Cassie opened it, her heart thudding. It was an invitation to perform at a major conference in New York, where Julian would be the keynote speaker. At the bottom was a handwritten message. I want you to sing at the event. Your voice deserves to be heard. Cassie frowned and tossed her phone onto the bed. Was this pity? Guilt? She didn't respond. She decided to stay in Pennsylvania. She didn't need Julian's stage or his gaze. But every night after the kids went home, Cassie sat alone and played her guitar. She tried writing something new, but the melodies always circled back to Julian. His rare smile, the way he had once listened to her like her voice was the only sound in the world. She shook her head, telling herself she didn't need him. But when a student asked, Miss Cassie, have you ever sung for someone you loved? She went silent, eyes stinging. She had sung for Julian, and he had walked away. Back in New York, Julian couldn't stop thinking about her. He visited the Rusty Anchor, hoping to see her, but found only Lena, who raised an eyebrow when she saw him. "She's gone, Mr. CEO," Lena said, her voice biting. "She's worth more than you thought." Julian nodded, leaving the bar hollow. He stopped by the cafe in Williamsburg, where he had once watched Cassie write lyrics. Her notebook was gone, but he pictured her sitting there, fingers drifting across the page. One night, he called her. The phone rang, but he hung up before she could answer. He didn't know what to say. He watched Broken Chords again, her lyrics slicing into him. "You broke the chords I played for you." He realized how deeply he had hurt her, and that he was the reason. He drafted another email. "Cassie, I was wrong. Please let me fix this." But once again, he didn't send it. He feared she wouldn't forgive him, feared she no longer needed him. In Pennsylvania, Cassie received a message from Lena. "The CEO showed up. He looked wrecked. He asked about you." Cassie read it, heart tightening, but she didn't reply. She focused on the kids, teaching them a cheerful song about fall. But when one little girl hit the wrong note, giggled and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Cassie." Cassie thought of Julian. He had never apologized aloud. But that look in his eyes at the gala, pain, confusion, said he never meant to hurt her. She opened his email again, rereading the handwritten note, "Your voice deserves to be heard." She wanted to delete it, but her finger paused. Instead, she closed the laptop, picked up her guitar, and played a new melody, one without words. It was sad, but somewhere in it was hope, like moonlight over the Susquehanna. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but she knew she hadn't forgotten. In his penthouse, Julian stared out over Manhattan. He played Streetlight Lullaby on his phone. Cassie's voice filled the silence. Tender, true. He made a decision. If he ever saw her again, he would apologize, no matter what it took. But where was that chance now when she was hundreds of miles away and their hearts were divided? By melodies no one dared to sing together. He turned off the lights, letting her voice echo in the darkness, hoping one day they'd find their way back. Still with us? If you're hearing this outside Soul Stories, come back to where the story truly began, with heart and honesty. Chapter 4. When Fate Comes Knocking. A bitter October night cloaked New York in shadows, the lights of skyscrapers flickering like candles in the dark. Inside the Javits Convention Center, hundreds gathered for a major tech conference where Julian Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovations, stood on stage. A spotlight illuminated his Navy suit as he spoke with calm authority about the future of technology and the mission of his scholarship fund. But his mind wasn't on the crowd. It was on Cassie Monroe, the woman whose voice had once awakened his heart. He had sent her an email, inviting her to perform tonight, hoping she'd come, but her silence lingered. He wondered if fate would bring them back together, or if he'd destroyed everything with his mistrust. His keynote ended with polite applause. Julian bowed, his gaze distant, and exited toward the parking lot, where his driver, Mike, waited by the black Bentley. "Long night, sir," Mike said, opening the door. Julian slid into the back seat, pulled out his phone, and saw a YouTube notification. Cassie had uploaded a new video. Broken Chords. He tapped play. Her voice poured out, raw and aching. "You took my song, left me in silence." He closed his eyes, guilt rising like a tide. He had let his fear of betrayal eclipse his trust. He whispered, barely audible, "If there's a God, please give me a chance to make this right." The car moved down the avenue, city lights blurring past. Suddenly, a sharp screech. "Hold on, Mr. Hayes," Mike shouted. Julian looked up. Headlights blazed straight into them. The car swerved, then slammed into a median. The crunch of metal tore through the night. Julian was thrown against the door, glass shattering, blood trailing from his temple. Darkness swallowed him, and just before consciousness slipped away, he thought he heard her voice, soft, haunting. Under streetlights were just strangers. In a small Pennsylvania town, Cassie sat in her dimly lit rented room, her guitar resting quietly on the bed. She had just finished another music class for underprivileged kids, trying to find joy in their laughter. But her heart remained tangled in pain, haunted by the gala and Julian's words. Your voice deserves to be heard. She tried to forget him, but every note she played led back to him. His gaze when she sang, the hurt in his accusations. She turned on the TV to shake the thoughts away, but a breaking news alert interrupted. Tech billionaire Julian Hayes in critical condition following car crash after major conference in New York. Foul play suspected. Images of the crushed Bentley flashed across the screen, police tape flapping in the wind. The anchor reported Julian was in the ICU, his condition grave. Cassie froze, the glass of water in her hand shattering on the floor. His smile, his wounded eyes, all of it crashed into her like a wave. She couldn't breathe. It was as if her own heart had stopped too. She dropped to her knees, clutching the small wooden cross hanging on the wall. Her grandmother's gift, long untouched. "Please, God," she whispered through tears, "don't let it end like this." Her faith had never been strong, but tonight it was the only light left. She thought of Streetlight Lullaby, the song she'd written for Julian, the one he'd once recorded. She had believed it was just a moment. Now she believed maybe, just maybe, she had been led to him, even if only to sing once. Cassie threw her guitar into the back seat of her aging Toyota Corolla. The Pennsylvania night was dark, but she drove, eyes blurred with tears. Highway lights streaked across her windshield. She whispered into the silence, "Please let me get there in time." She remembered what her grandmother used to say, "Faith is walking even when you can't see the path." She didn't know if she still loved Julian or if she was just terrified of losing him, but she had to be there. The radio flicked on automatically. She turned it off. She only wanted to hear the song inside her, holding secrets, chasing dangers. In New York, police combed through the wreckage. The Bentley's brake lines had been deliberately cut, an act of sabotage. A typed threat had arrived at Hayes Innovations that morning. Drop the project, or next time, no one survives. Investigators suspected Martin Kessler, the same man who had once manipulated both Elise and Cassie. Media outlets swarmed with headlines. Tech mogul assassination attempt? Rival sabotage or scandal? But in the ICU at Mount Sinai Hospital, Julian lay unconscious, machines beeping in rhythm with his fragile heartbeat. Unaware of the storm outside, Cassie drove through the night 6 hours without stopping. At a gas station, she gripped the cross in her pocket, whispering, "Please keep him safe." As dawn broke, she reached New York. She parked outside the hospital, hair tangled, guitar slung across her back. Inside, a nurse guided her to the ICU. Only family was allowed in, but she was permitted to look through the glass. Julian lay still, head bandaged, face pale, an oxygen tube beneath his nose. Cassie froze, tears streaming silently. It felt like the world had collapsed. She sank onto a bench outside the room, her guitar beside her. A nurse passed by, gave her a kind look, but said nothing when Cassie began to hum softly. Streetlight Lullaby. Just above a whisper, "Under streetlights, we're just strangers." Her voice cracked, but she kept singing, like a prayer, a plea, a lifeline. She believed, even if just a little, that God might be listening, that fate hadn't finished their story yet. As her song ended, she bowed her head, whispering, "Julian, please don't go." She didn't know if he could hear her, didn't know if he would wake, but she was there, with trembling faith and a voice full of love, hoping it was enough to bring him back. Inside the ICU, Julian's heartbeat, though weak, persisted, and somewhere, in the deep shadows of unconsciousness, a distant melody stirred. Familiar, soft, like her voice, like light calling him home. Mount Sinai Hospital shimmered under the cold, sterile, white lights, the steady beeping of machines marking a rhythm that refused to cease. Inside the ICU room, Julian Hayes lay motionless, his head and chest wrapped in white bandages, an oxygen tube beneath his nose. The sharp, commanding features of the powerful CEO had softened into something pale and vulnerable. Cassie Monroe sat beside him, trembling hands resting on the acoustic guitar across her lap. She had been there since morning, after driving all night from Pennsylvania, fueled only by fragile hope and a desperate prayer that God would keep him alive. Her eyes stayed fixed on Julian as if the moment she looked away, he might vanish. Cassie hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten, save for a weak cup of coffee from the vending machine. The nurse had allowed her into the ICU for a few hours, with one rule: no noise. But she hadn't said anything about singing softly. Her hair was tangled, her eyes red from crying. She thought of those brief but unforgettable weeks, working with Julian, the way he had listened to Streetlight Lullaby in his office, how his eyes had softened like he was about to say something that never came. Then the gala, his doubt, his cruel words. She'd left New York believing she was strong enough to forget him. But now, seeing him like this, broken and still, she knew she wasn't strong enough to lose him. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his. His skin was cold. "Julian," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I was strong when I left New York, when I ignored your email. But I'm not. I'm weak. I can't lose you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, soaking into her worn coat. She bowed her head, murmuring a prayer. "Dear God, please give him another chance. If this is destiny, don't let it end like this." Her faith had always been a flicker, but now it was the only light guiding her through the dark. She picked up her guitar, her fingers brushing softly over the strings, and then she began to sing. Her voice was fragile, barely more than a breath. Under streetlights, we're just strangers, holding secrets, chasing dangers. The melody drifted through the room like incense, sacred, trembling. She sang not for performance, not for praise, but as prayer. Each note was a lifeline, tying her to him. When she reached the final lines, her voice broke completely. "I love you, Julian. Whether you hear me or not, I love you." She lowered her head, tears soaking her sleeves. And then, something. A faint squeeze. His fingers wrapped loosely around hers. Cassie froze, breath catching in her throat. She looked up. His eyes were still closed, but a single tear trailed from the corner of his eye. "Julian?" she whispered, voice shaking. He didn't respond, still hovering somewhere between unconsciousness and wakefulness. But the pressure of his fingers, subtle, deliberate, was enough. She clutched his hand, sobbing openly now, the moment a fragile miracle in her arms. God had heard her. Somehow, against all odds, he had heard. She refused to leave, even when the nurse gently reminded her visiting hours had ended. Cassie pulled out her notebook and began to write. Lyrics scribbled hastily, born from emotion and need. "In the quiet, I found you. Through the darkness, faith pulled through." There was no title yet, only a heartbeat and a promise. She kept glancing at Julian, half expecting him to open his eyes at any moment. She whispered, "You have to wake up, Julian. I still owe you a song." Outside the ICU, the world churned. News crews camped in the hospital lobby, headlines flashing across screens. Billionaire tech mogul survives assassination attempt. Brake lines cut, all eyes on rival Martin Kessler. Police confirmed the crash had been deliberate, and all signs pointed to Julian's longtime nemesis, Kessler, the same man who had once deceived both Elise and Cassie. But inside that hospital room, none of that mattered. Cassie didn't care about enemies, business, or the media. She only cared about the man in the bed. She reached into her pocket, fingers finding the small wooden cross her grandmother had left her. She clutched it tightly. God brought me here, she thought. Now please, keep him with me. She stayed at the hospital all day, only stepping away for a brief moment to call Lena. I'm not going back to Pennsylvania right now, she said quietly. On the other end, Lena sighed. You love him, don't you? Cassie didn't respond. She just said, thank you. She returned to Julian's bedside and began to write again. She wrote about faith, about love, about things she once believed she wasn't worthy of. Each line on the page was a step closer to him, closer to healing what was broken. Near midnight, the doctor entered, glancing at Julian's chart. Cassie rose to her feet, heart racing. Ms. Monroe, the doctor said in a calm voice, he's past the critical phase. His vitals are stabilizing. He'll need rest, time, but he's going to recover. It may take weeks or longer. Cassie nodded, tears sliding down her face again, this time out of relief. Thank you, she whispered. eyes on Julian. He was still unconscious, but the slight squeeze of his hand, the single tear down his cheek, it had been enough. She knew he had heard her. Somewhere in that dreamlike void, he had reached for her. She sat back down, placing her notebook beside the bed. She didn't sing anymore. She just held his hand, feeling warmth slowly return to it. She leaned close, whispering, "I'll be here, Julian, no matter how long it takes." She looked toward the window where the lights of New York glittered like scattered notes of a song. And deep in her heart, stronger now than ever, was the belief that destiny had led them to each other, and that God would lead them through this night. Inside the ICU, Julian's heartbeat continued, steady and true. A quiet melody beginning again, promising one day they would sing it together. Chapter 5. A Fragile Reunion. Autumn sunlight filtered softly through the blinds of Mount Sinai Hospital, warming the recovery room where Julian Hayes lay. 4 days had passed since the accident. Though he was no longer in the ICU, his body remained weak, a fresh scar peeking from beneath the bandage on his forehead. Cassie Monroe sat by his bedside, hands clasped tightly, her expression tender but anxious. She had been there from the moment he was admitted, leaving only briefly to shower and call Lena. Her faith, both in God and in the fate that had led her back to Julian, was the flame that kept her steady, even as her heart fluttered every time she looked at him. Julian opened his eyes, the blue of them dimmed by medication, but brightening when they met hers. "You're here," he rasped. Cassie blinked back tears and smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." Her voice trembled as she told him about the overnight drive from Pennsylvania, about the moment she saw him still and unconscious in the ICU. "I sang to you," she said softly. "Streetlight lullaby. I prayed God would let you hear me, let you stay." Julian listened, a dull ache rising in his chest, but it was softened by warmth. He remembered her voice, distant like light in a long tunnel, pulling him back from the dark. "You stayed the whole time," he murmured, as if needing confirmation. Cassie nodded, fingers brushing the small wooden cross in her pocket. "I couldn't leave you alone." He reached for her hand. The motion made him wince, but he managed it. "Cassie," he said, his voice raw, "you're here when I have nothing. No power, no reputation. You're my family." His words fell like a prayer, bare and honest. Cassie bowed her head, tears spilling down her cheeks, though her smile bloomed through them. "I wrote that song in the ICU, for you," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much I loved you, until I almost lost you." Julian squeezed her hand gently. His eyes said what his voice couldn't. "I heard you. Your voice was my light." The door opened, breaking the moment. Emma Hayes stepped inside, her blonde hair tied back, her gray suit perfectly pressed. At 38, she was a respected attorney in Boston, always composed, but her eyes now brimmed with concern. "Julian," she said, her tone firm but shaky, "you scared me to death." She leaned down to hug him gently, careful not to jostle his injuries. Julian offered a faint smile. "You got here fast, Emma." Her gaze shifted to Cassie, curious but kind. "And you are—" Julian introduced her without hesitation. "Cassie Monroe. She saved me." Emma gave Cassie a nod of quiet appraisal, then softened. "Thank you," she said. "Rachel told me you've been here since the beginning." Rachel Nguyen, Julian's assistant, entered just behind Emma, holding an iPad and a bouquet of yellow daisies. At 30, she was efficient, loyal, and rarely frazzled. Today, she looked visibly relieved. "Boss," she said with a teasing smile, "don't scare me like that again." She placed the flowers on the table and updated him. "Mike, your driver, has a sprained wrist and some bruises, but he's home resting. He sends his regards." Cassie listened quietly, feeling like she just stepped into another part of Julian's life. Emma sat, recounting how she had flown in the moment she heard. "Our parents have been gone a long time. It's always been just the two of us," she said, looking at her brother. "You've always kept things to yourself. But this time, I really thought I'd lost you." Julian squeezed her hand. "I'm okay, because of Cassie." Emma looked at Cassie with gratitude. "Looks like my brother finally found someone worth trusting." Rachel shifted the conversation to work, explaining that she was coordinating with police about the crash. Moments later, Detective Ramirez arrived, handing Julian a business card. "The brake lines were cut," Ramirez said grimly. "We received an anonymous threat targeting your project. Our prime suspect is Martin Kessler." Julian's expression darkened. He explained how Kessler had manipulated both Elise and Cassie for personal gain. Cassie froze at the name, pain flashing across her face. "We'll help the police," she said firmly. "He's hurt enough people." Julian gave her a look full of respect. Emma nodded. "I'll provide any legal support needed." Once Ramirez and Emma departed, Rachel lingered just long enough to urge Julian to rest. "The company's fine, boss. Just focus on healing," she said, then winked at Cassie before leaving. Silence returned to the room, intimate and still. Julian turned to Cassie, his voice softer. "Your voice didn't just save me, it can inspire others." He proposed that she perform at the Foundation's major upcoming event once he recovered, so the world could hear her gift. Cassie blushed. "I'm not a star, Julian." He smiled faintly, despite the pain. "You're my star." Cassie shared stories of the kids in Pennsylvania, how they were learning chords and writing their first lyrics. Julian listened, his eyes gleaming. "You make me want to live better," he said. Cassie leaned down and kissed his forehead, a soft, reverent touch. "Then you better get well," she whispered. "I still have so many songs for you." She placed her notebook on the bedside table, open to a new song. "In the quiet, I found you." Julian reached out, touching the page. His eyes said he understood. This song belonged to them. Cassie stepped into the hallway, sat on a bench, and whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, God, for keeping us." Her faith had carried her through fear, and now it lifted her toward hope. Outside the hospital, New York glittered, its lights like scattered notes waiting to be sung. Julian and Cassie had found each other again, fragile but real. And with Cassie's music as their bridge, they would begin anew, trusting that fate and faith would guide their next verse together. You're watching Soul Stories, home of original, heart-touching tales. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. This story lives here and only here. Thank you for being with us. Chapter 5. Building a Future Together. 3 months after the accident, New York was wrapped in the golden glow of autumn. Leaves danced across the sidewalks, and the chill in the air carried the scent of change. Julian Hayes, though still walking with a cane, had finally left Mount Sinai and returned to his Manhattan penthouse. The scar on his forehead had faded, but his eyes shone brighter than ever, thanks to Cassie Monroe. She was by his side every day, her guitar slung over her shoulder, her smile like sunlight in every room, her faith in God and in the destiny that had brought them through darkness was the wind beneath them both. Now, hand in hand, they were rebuilding what had once been broken. Cassie, now a co-founder of Julian's Scholarship Foundation, threw herself into reviving the project. Together, they planned a benefit concert at Lincoln Center, blending music and mission to support underprivileged students. Though nervous, Cassie agreed to headline the event, bringing Streetlight Lullaby and a new song, Quiet Light, to the stage. Julian, still in recovery, managed the work from home, with Rachel, his steadfast assistant, handling logistics. Emma, Julian's sister, flew in from Boston to provide legal support, ensuring the foundation ran smoothly. Each morning, Cassie arrived at Julian's penthouse with coffee from their favorite Williamsburg cafe and her lyric notebook in hand. They sat by the window overlooking Central Park, talking about the foundation and about the future. Julian, once guarded, opened up more each day, telling her stories of his childhood with Emma, playing piano in their parents' home in Connecticut. Cassie spoke of writing songs in her Brooklyn apartment to keep the pain at bay. "I think God gave me music," she whispered one morning, fingers touching the cross in her pocket, "so I could find you." Julian smiled, lacing his fingers with hers. "And I thank him for that." One crisp afternoon, they walked slowly through Central Park, leaves falling like golden confetti around them. Julian's steps were careful but sure. They paused at Bow Bridge, where sunlight shimmered on the water like scattered notes. Julian, in a soft navy sweater, reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver ring, engraved with 2 simple words, "First kiss." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "Cassie," he said, voice low, "our first kiss started as a dare, but it became the beginning of everything. If that was chapter 1, would you write the rest of our story with me?" Cassie blinked, her eyes filling with tears. She thought of that night at the gala, of his voice in the ICU calling her family, of his hand in hers when he came back to life. She nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, Julian, forever." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, clumsily with the cane, but with all the warmth of a man reborn. They kissed, gentle, deep, like a prayer answered. Cassie whispered, "Thank you, God, for bringing us here." Julian kissed her forehead. "And for bringing me you." Back at the penthouse, Rachel was waiting with news from Detective Ramirez. "The police found evidence," she said, handing Julian an iPad. "A former employee of Kessler confessed. He hired someone to sabotage your brakes." Emma arrived moments later, adding, "I've spoken with attorneys in New York. Kessler won't walk away from this." Julian squeezed Cassie's hand, his expression resolute. "He hurt both of us," he said. "Now, we end this." Cassie nodded, a sense of peace washing over her. The ghost of Martin Kessler no longer held power over them. The night of the Lincoln Center concert arrived like a hush before a song. Cassie stood backstage, clutching her guitar, heart pounding. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose, her nerves electric. Julian sat in the front row beside Emma and Rachel. His eyes held pride, reverence, love. Mike, his driver, his arm fully healed, was there too, clapping enthusiastically. As the lights dimmed and then rose, Cassie stepped onto the stage. She opened with Streetlight Lullaby. Under streetlights were just strangers. The audience fell into reverent silence, then erupted into applause. She followed with Quiet Light, the song she'd written in the hospital. "In the quiet, I found you, through the darkness. Faith pulled through." Her lyrics told their story, from an impulsive kiss to a confession beside a hospital bed. By the final note, the crowd was on its feet, many with tears in their eyes. Julian's heart swelled. The press later called her an indie voice with soul, the future of New York music. But for Cassie, the only review that mattered was the look in Julian's eyes. "You are my everything." After the show, they hosted a small gathering at the penthouse. Emma raised her glass, teasing, "I never thought my buttoned-up brother would get engaged to a rising star." Rachel grinned. "I bet Mike didn't see it coming either. He's been retelling that romantic hospital saga all week." Mike shrugged from the corner. "I just drive the car, but I knew she was special from day one." Cassie blushed, leaning into Julian's shoulder. He kissed her hair and whispered, "You make everything better." When the guests had left, Julian and Cassie stood at the window, gazing down at Central Park. She strummed a few gentle chords on her guitar, a new melody humming to life, one still without lyrics. Julian wrapped his arms around her from behind, his voice soft. "Write this one for us." Cassie nodded, her fingers brushing the ring marked first kiss, and in her heart, she whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving us a future." Her music, now part of their shared life, flowed like the city lights below, guiding them forward. Hand in hand, they faced the unknown. With love and faith, nothing could break them. Martin Kessler remained a name in a file, no longer a shadow. Cassie and Julian, bound by music and fate, were writing their next song together. A song called Forever. 1 year after the accident, Manhattan shimmered in lights for the charity gala at the same glass tower in Midtown, where Cassie Monroe and Julian Hayes had first met. The marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers that sparkled like musical notes, and the laughter of the elite mingled with the clinking of wine glasses. Cassie stood backstage, dressed in a radiant red gown that hugged her figure, a guitar in her arms and her heart pounding. Tonight she wasn't a bartender. She was the star of the evening, about to perform Forever's song, a piece written about her and Julian's journey, from a daring kiss to a lifelong promise. Julian, fully recovered, stood near the stage, his black tux accentuating his steady frame. The faint scar on his forehead was the only visible trace of the past, but his eyes gleamed as he watched Cassie. Their scholarship fund had now supported hundreds of students, and tonight's gala celebrated that success. Emma sat at the front table, eyes shining with pride. Rachel, ever the multitasker, was overseeing logistics while whispering to Mike, who had returned to work after the crash. "She's going to make everyone cry," Rachel murmured. Mike nodded, smiling. "I knew from the first time I saw her sing." Cassie stepped into the spotlight, her hair cascading over her shoulders. She strummed the first chord, her voice clear and soulful as Forever's song began. "From a dare to a dream, you found me. In the chaos, love crowned me." The lyrics trace their love story, from that impulsive kiss at a gala, to a whispered "I love you" in a hospital room, to the first kiss ring beneath the trees of Central Park. The room stilled. Many reached for tissues as tears welled up. Julian watched, heart full, remembering the first time she sang Streetlight Lullaby. She had cracked open the walls around his heart, and now she was his world. As the final note lingered, the crowd rose to their feet, applause thunderous. Cassie smiled and bowed, but her eyes searched only for Julian. He walked onto the stage, took the microphone, and spoke, his voice low, clear, unwavering. "1 year ago, in this very place, one kiss broke down every wall I had." He turned to her, gaze locked. The audience buzzed, sensing something monumental. He knelt, pulling a gold ring from his jacket, more brilliant than the first, but still engraved with the words "First Kiss." "Cassie Monroe," he said, "you gave me a family, a song, a life. Will you turn our first kiss into our forever kiss?" Cassie's eyes shimmered with tears. She looked at the man who had once doubted her, nearly lost her, but now stood as her everything. "Yes, Julian," she whispered, "forever." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, a few joyful whistles. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger and rose, pulling her into his arms. They kissed, not as a dare, but as a promise. Cassie whispered, fingers brushing the cross in her dress pocket. "Thank you, God, for him." Julian kissed her forehead and echoed, "And for you." Emma stood, clapping through tears. "My stubborn little brother finally got it right," she said to Rachel, laughing. Rachel raised her phone to capture the moment. "This is definitely going viral." Mike nodded, warm-eyed. "They earned it." In a corner, Lena shouted, "You better get married fast, Monroe." Cassie laughed, leaning into Julian. It felt like the whole world was singing with her. After the proposal, she returned to the stage and sang Quiet Light, the song born in the silence of the ICU. Her voice soared through lyrics of faith and love that had carried them through darkness. The crowd rose again, tears in their eyes. The press later wrote, "Cassie Monroe isn't just a voice, she's the soul of New York." Julian watched from the wings, his heart full. This song, their story, it all proved fate had chosen right. The night wound down, but the joy didn't end. Rachel returned with news. Detective Ramirez just emailed. They've arrested Martin Kessler. Full confession, solid evidence. Emma, calling from Boston, said firmly, "He won't walk free this time. I'll see to it." Julian squeezed Cassie's hand. "He's the past." Cassie nodded, a sense of release washing over her. Martin Kessler, who once tried to manipulate and destroy, was no longer a shadow in their lives. They stepped out into the night, the city glowing around them like a living symphony. Cassie held Julian's hand, the first kiss ring gleaming in moonlight. They made a quick stop at a nearby recording studio where Cassie, with help from the Foundation's team, had recorded the final version of Forever's song. When it was released, the track soared up the indie charts, quickly becoming a phenomenon. But to Cassie, the true success was watching Julian listen to it, eyes lit up as if hearing her heart. In the car with Mike driving, they passed Central Park, where Julian had first proposed. He wrapped his arm around her and murmured, "Write a new song for our wedding." Cassie smiled, nodded, and touched the cross at her neck. She whispered silently, "Thank you, God, for this future." Her music now pulsed with their shared life, like the lights of New York guiding them forward. With faith, with love, and with melody, they were ready for forever.